Imagine a fearless soldier, renowned for his bravery and vanity, brought to the ground by a cannonball. In the silence of recovery, celestial visions guide him from the noblest courts to the heart of a spiritual revolution. This is the journey of a man whose inner battles, fueled by divine revelations, not only transformed his own life, but also gave birth to a global movement of faith and education, leaving a legacy that still resonates today. This is the story of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. In the flickering candlelight of a cold December night in 1491, amid the rustic surroundings of a humble stable, a child was born who would alter the course of religious history. The choice of birthplace was no coincidence. His mother, Marina Sanchez de Licona, had insisted on giving birth in a stable, driven by a profound devotion to mirror Christ's nativity. The air was thick with the scent of hay and livestock, the atmosphere charged with an almost mystical significance as the 13th child of the noble Loyola family entered the world. Named Inigo, after the revered abbot of Oña, he was born into the twilight of medieval Spain, a world where the clash of swords and the whispers of prayer intermingled in the tapestry of daily life. The Loyola castle, with its imposing stone walls and echoing corridors, became the stage for young Inigo's early years. The youngest of 13 children, he grew up in an environment where tales of chivalry and military glory filled the great hall during evening gatherings, sparking a fire in his young heart that would burn for years to come. As Inigo matured, his personality emerged as a fascinating contradiction, noble by birth but untamed in spirit. The castle's training grounds rang with the sound of clashing steel as he honed his swordsmanship, his natural aggression and quick temper making him both feared and admired among his peers. His reputation for participating in violent duels spread through the narrow streets of Azpeitia, where he was known to draw his sword at the slightest provocation, the metallic ring of blade against blade becoming a familiar sound in the town's shadowy corners. Yet beneath this fierce exterior lay a deep vanity that would play a crucial role in his future transformation. Inigo's attention to his appearance was legendary. He meticulously maintained his long, flowing hair and insisted on wearing the finest clothing available. A physical imperfection, a slightly shorter leg, became an obsession for the young nobleman. The soft padding he added to his boots to disguise this flaw was a secret he guarded zealously, a detail that spoke volumes about his pride and self-image. The streets of Azpeitia and the corridors of power became his playground, where he engaged in what he later described as all manner of worldly vanities. The clinking of wine glasses in taverns, the rustle of fine silk garments, and the admiring glances of courtly ladies formed the backdrop of his young adult life. His reputation as a carouser and fighter preceded him, yet his noble bearing and natural charisma often smoothed over the consequences of his impetuous actions. The turning point in Inigo's worldly adventures came during the Battle of Pamplona in 1521. The atmosphere was thick with tension as French forces laid siege to the fortress. While others counseled surrender, Inigo's voice rang out in fierce opposition, his warrior spirit refusing to accept defeat. The air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the deafening roar of cannons, and the cries of wounded men when fate intervened. A cannonball whistled through the air, its trajectory forever altering the course of Inigo's life. The impact was devastating. The ball shattered one leg and severely damaged the other. The proud warrior, who had never shown weakness, lay broken on the battlefield. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was the psychological trauma that cut deeper. As he was carried from the battlefield, the clanking of his armor now a hollow reminder of his former glory, Inigo faced not just a physical recovery, but an existential crisis. His identity as a warrior, the very foundation of his self-image, lay in pieces like his shattered leg. During his recovery at the family castle, Inigo's legendary strength of will manifested in a new way. He endured multiple surgeries without anesthesia, refusing to cry out in pain. Witnesses described how he merely clenched his fists, his knuckles white with tension, as surgeons broke and reset his poorly healed bones. Yet it was during these long, pain-filled nights that the first seeds of transformation were planted. In a fever-induced state, he experienced what many considered his first miracle, a visitation from St. Peter, a moment that would mark the beginning of his spiritual awakening. The proud warrior's heart began to stir with new questions and longings. The same determination that had made him a feared swordsman now turned inward as he faced the greatest battle of his life, the battle for his own soul. The echoes of his former life, the clash of swords, the revelry of parties, the admiring glances, began to fade against the growing whisper of a different calling. The chambers of the Loyola castle, once echoing with the sounds of revelry and martial preparation, now fell silent, save for the occasional groans of pain from Inigo's sickbed. The proud warrior, confined to his quarters, found himself in an unfamiliar battle, one that raged not on blood-soaked fields, but within the depths of his soul. The long hours of isolation became his first true encounter with himself, stripped of the distractions and vanities that had previously defined his existence. During these seemingly endless days of convalescence, Inigo's only companions were two books, A Life of Christ and a collection of saints' stories, brought to him when his requests for romantic tales of chivalry went unfulfilled. Initially, he approached these texts with reluctance, his warrior's mind yearning for tales of martial glory. Yet as he turned each page, something profound began to stir within him. The quiet rustle of paper became a whisper of divine invitation, each word seeping into his consciousness like morning dew penetrating parched earth. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Inigo found himself caught between two worlds. When he dreamed of worldly glory and military triumph, his heart would momentarily soar, only to leave him feeling hollow and restless. But when he contemplated the lives of saints, particularly Francis of Assisi's radical embrace of poverty, a different kind of excitement would build within him, leaving a lasting peace that puzzled and intrigued him. This internal struggle manifested in sleepless nights where he would lie awake, tears streaming down his face, wrestling with questions he had never before considered. One night, in the depths of his spiritual wrestling, Inigo experienced a vision that would forever alter his path. Our Lady appeared to him, holding the infant Jesus, surrounded by a light that made the candle light in his room seem like mere shadows. The vision lasted barely a moment, but its impact was eternal. The warmth of divine love he experienced in that moment burned away the last vestiges of his attachment to his former life. The very air in his room seemed charged with sacred presence, and for days afterward, he found himself weeping at the memory of such tender grace. In a dramatic gesture that symbolized his internal transformation, Inigo took a knife to his long, carefully maintained hair, the crown of his vanity. Each strand that fell to the floor represented another piece of his old identity being shed. The man who had once spent hours preening before mirrors now gave away his fine clothes to a beggar, choosing instead to wear rough sackcloth that scratched against his skin, a constant reminder of his new purpose. As his body healed, Inigo's spiritual hunger grew insatiable. He began experiencing visions with increasing frequency, including a mysterious encounter where he saw Christ embodied in the stars themselves. The night sky became his cathedral, each celestial body a testament to divine glory. Yet these experiences also brought new challenges. Periods of intense spiritual ecstasy would be followed by devastating doubts and what he would later call scruples, tormenting questions about his worthiness and the authenticity of his conversion. When finally able to travel, Inigo embarked on a pilgrimage to Montserrat, his destination chosen not for its military significance, as his previous journeys had been, but for its spiritual power. The arduous journey, each painful step a reminder of his still healing wounds, became a walking meditation. The same determination that had once driven him to endure multiple surgeries now pushed him forward on this spiritual quest, despite physical discomfort and the mockery of those who recognized the once proud nobleman in his beggar's garb. At Montserrat, before the Black Madonna, Inigo performed his overnight vigil, not as a knight preparing for battle, but as a soul surrendering to divine love. He stood guard through the night, his military training transformed into spiritual discipline. As dawn approached, he laid his sword and dagger at the altar, exchanging his warrior's weapons for the invisible armor of faith. The cold stone floor beneath his knees, the flickering candlelight, and the subtle incense floating through the air marked this moment of complete surrender. But it was in Manresa, a small town where he intended to stay briefly, that Inigo's transformation reached its depths. Living in a cave on the outskirts of town, he embraced a life of radical poverty and intense prayer. The cave's damp walls and hard floor became his home, the sound of the nearby river Cardona his constant companion. Here, he experienced both the heights of mystical ecstasy and the depths of spiritual desolation. For 8 days, he lay in a state of such profound rapture that locals thought him dead, his body barely breathing as his spirit soared in realms beyond ordinary understanding. The culmination of his time in Manresa came with the vision at the river Cardona, a moment of illumination so profound that Íñigo would later say he learned more in that single instant than in all his years of study. The rushing waters seemed to speak divine mysteries, and the very fabric of creation appeared transformed before his eyes. He saw the interconnectedness of all things, the presence of God in every particle of existence, and the divine purpose underlying all of creation. This experience would later form the foundation of his spiritual exercises, though at the time, he lacked the words to fully express what he had witnessed. During his months in Manresa, Íñigo's mystical experiences became almost daily occurrences. Perhaps the most significant was his vision of the Holy Trinity, which appeared to him as 3 musical keys playing in perfect harmony. This musical metaphor would stay with him throughout his life, helping him understand and explain the mysterious unity and distinction within the divine nature. The vision left him with tears of joy streaming down his face, a physical manifestation of the overwhelming love he experienced. These experiences were not merely personal consolations, but became the wellspring from which he would later draw to guide others. In the midst of his own transformation, Íñigo began to understand the patterns of spiritual growth, the alternating rhythms of consolation and desolation, and the ways in which God works to purify and elevate the soul. His own journey from warrior to mystic was forming him into a spiritual guide who would help countless others navigate their own paths to divine encounter. The cobblestone streets of Barcelona echoed with an unusual sight: a man in his 30s dressed simply, sitting among children in a grammar school. This was Íñigo, the once proud nobleman and warrior, now humbling himself to learn Latin from the very basics, the sound of young voices reciting declensions, mixed with the occasional muffled laughter at this strange adult classmate. But Íñigo remained undeterred. His warrior's discipline had found a new battlefield in the struggle with Latin grammar, each conjugation a small victory in his campaign for knowledge. The journey from mystic to scholar was not an easy transition. During long nights of study, illuminated by candlelight that cast dancing shadows on worn textbooks, Íñigo would often find himself transported into states of spiritual ecstasy. The challenge became maintaining focus on his studies when his soul yearned to soar in contemplation. He learned to limit his prayer time, understanding that God was now calling him to the disciplined work of learning. This internal struggle between contemplation and study would later inform his revolutionary approach to spirituality, one that embraced both divine transcendence and practical engagement with the world. His time at the University of Alcalá brought new challenges. The halls of academia proved as dangerous as any battlefield he had known, but the weapons here were words and ideas. His growing influence among students and his innovative spiritual direction methods drew the attention of the Inquisition. The cold, damp cells where he was imprisoned 3 times became chambers of contemplation, where he refined his understanding of orthodoxy and developed the diplomatic skills that would later serve him well. During one particularly harsh interrogation, as morning light filtered through the prison bars, Íñigo displayed remarkable composure. When questioned about his teachings, he responded with such clarity and humility that even his interrogators were moved. Yet the experience taught him the need for formal theological training to protect both himself and his future mission. The walls of his cell became a crucible where his vision for education and spirituality began to take clear shape. The journey to Paris marked a new chapter. The city's intellectual vibrancy pulsed through its narrow streets, where scholars debated the latest ideas from the Renaissance and Reformation. Here, Íñigo, who now began calling himself Ignatius, reflecting his inner transformation, found himself navigating between the traditional scholasticism of the Sorbonne and the new humanist learning sweeping Europe. The intersection of these intellectual currents would profoundly influence his vision for education. Living in extreme poverty, Ignatius would often make his way through Paris's bustling markets during summer breaks, begging for funds to support his studies. The same voice that had once commanded soldiers now humbly asked for alms. Each coin collected a lesson in humility. Yet it was during these seemingly degrading moments that he found opportunities to engage with people from all walks of life, developing the interpersonal skills that would become crucial to his mission. The turning point came with his meeting of Francis Xavier and Peter Faber. The dusty rooms of St. Barbe College became the birthplace of a movement that would transform the Church. Xavier, a proud Spanish nobleman with ambitious academic dreams, initially scoffed at the older, poorly dressed Ignatius. Yet through patient friendship and spiritual guidance, Ignatius gradually won him over. The sound of their late-night conversations, mixing academic discourse with spiritual insight, would echo through the college corridors. Ignatius's method of forming deep spiritual friendships while maintaining rigorous academic standards created a unique dynamic. His room became a gathering place where students would come to discuss both their studies and their souls. The spiritual exercises, refined through years of personal experience, became his tool for guiding others through their own transformative encounters with God. Each person he directed through the exercises became not just a follower, but a companion in a shared mission. As the initial group of companions grew, their discussions evolved from personal spiritual matters to a broader vision of service to the Church. In the chapel of Montmartre, on the Feast of the Assumption in 1534, Ignatius and his first companions took vows of poverty and chastity. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows illuminated their faces as they committed themselves to a mission that would take them to the ends of the earth. The years following the Montmartre vows were filled with both triumph and challenge. The companions dispersed across Europe, testing their abilities as preachers and teachers. Their letters to each other, carried by merchants and pilgrims across dangerous roads, maintained their unity of purpose. Ignatius's gift for organization and inspiration shone through his correspondence as he wove their individual missions into a coherent whole. The decision to form a religious order emerged gradually through long discussions and careful discernment. In a small church outside Rome, the companions spent hours in prayer and debate, their voices mixing with the sound of crickets in the Italian night. The question before them was not just about organization, but about how best to serve God and the Church in a world undergoing rapid change. The process of gaining papal approval tested all of Ignatius's diplomatic skills. The corridors of Vatican power were as complex as any noble court he had known in his youth. Yet his combination of mystical insight and practical wisdom won over even skeptical cardinals. When Pope Paul III finally approved the Society of Jesus in 1540, it represented not just the birth of a new religious order, but the culmination of a vision that had begun in a soldier's sickbed at Loyola. The Society's founding document revealed Ignatius's genius for combining spiritual depth with practical organization. The formula of the Institute, written in clear, precise Latin, laid out a revolutionary vision of religious life, one that dispensed with traditional monastic practices in favor of greater mobility and adaptability in service to the Church. Every word was carefully chosen to reflect both the mystical experiences that had shaped Ignatius and the practical wisdom he had gained through years of study and leadership. In a modest room in Rome, lit by the warm glow of candles and the first light of dawn, Ignatius of Loyola began each day at his simple wooden desk. The same hands that had once wielded a sword now moved gracefully across paper, penning thousands of letters that would guide and shape the rapidly growing Society of Jesus. His days as Superior General were marked by an extraordinary combination of mystical experiences and practical leadership, his gift of tears flowing freely during daily Mass, even as he managed the complex operations of an expanding global organization. The transformation of the former soldier into a spiritual general was complete, yet Ignatius brought his military precision to this new role. His small room became the command center of a spiritual army that was rapidly spreading across the globe. Maps covered his walls, marked with pins showing Jesuit missions from India to Brazil. Each morning, he would pray over these locations, his tears falling as he held in his heart the companions facing martyrdom in Japan, disease in India, or persecution in Protestant territories. Ignatius's leadership style was revolutionary for its time. While other religious orders remained cloistered in monasteries, he sent his men to the frontiers of the known world. "The world is our house," he would often say, his voice carrying the conviction of one who had seen divine purpose in every aspect of creation. His letters, sometimes dictated from his bed during bouts of illness, carried not just instructions, but also profound spiritual insight, personal care, and strategic vision. The society grew rapidly under his leadership, but not without challenges. Ignatius faced opposition from within the church and without, yet handled each crisis with remarkable equanimity. When criticized for accepting converts of Jewish ancestry into the society, a controversial decision in Spain's climate of racial prejudice, he stood firm, stating that, "In Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek." His own experience of transformation had taught him that God's grace knows no bounds. Perhaps his most remarkable achievement was the establishment of the Jesuit education system. Drawing on his own difficult experience as an adult student, Ignatius created schools that combined academic excellence with spiritual formation. The sound of student debates in Jesuit colleges, mixing Latin eloquence with philosophical insight, became a common feature from Rome to Goa. His educational vision was revolutionary: free education for all who qualified, regardless of social status, with a curriculum that balanced traditional wisdom with modern learning. As he aged, Ignatius's physical ailments increased, but his spiritual sight grew ever sharper. Those who worked closely with him reported extraordinary occurrences, moments when he seemed to know events happening hundreds of miles away, instances of healing through his prayers, and times when his face would shine with mysterious light during prayer. Yet he remained remarkably practical, attending to details of administration even as he experienced mystical encounters. His relationship with money revealed his practical wisdom. While maintaining strict personal poverty, he was astute in managing the society's resources. "God's work," he would say, "requires God's provision, but also human prudence." He established systems for funding schools and missions that would sustain the society's work for centuries to come. The same man who had once given away his fine clothes to a beggar now carefully managed complex financial networks to support global missionary work. Ignatius's final years were marked by an increasing physical weakness, but an ever stronger spiritual presence. His ability to see the divine in all things reached its pinnacle. Even the sight of a small flower could move him to tears of joy as he perceived God's beauty within it. Yet he continued his administrative duties until the end, directing the society's rapid expansion while maintaining its spiritual core. On the night before his death, which he had accurately predicted, Ignatius called his secretary to his room. In the flickering candlelight, he gave his final instructions with characteristic clarity and peace. His last word, "Jesus," was whispered with such tenderness that those present felt they had witnessed a lover's farewell. When he was found dead the next morning, his face bore an expression of profound peace. The impact of Ignatius's life and work continued to ripple outward after his death. The Society of Jesus became a major force in the Counter-Reformation, education, missionary work, and scientific research. Jesuit astronomers studied the stars that had once shown Ignatius the face of Christ. Jesuit missionaries bridged cultures, creating dictionaries of native languages and defending indigenous peoples' rights. Jesuit educators developed new methods of teaching that combined classical learning with spiritual formation. More than 460 years after his death, Ignatius's legacy continues to shape the Church and the world. His spiritual exercises have guided countless souls through their own transformative encounters with God. The educational principles he established continue to influence modern pedagogy. The spiritual insight that God can be found in all things has helped bridge the perceived gap between faith and science, contemplation and action, heaven and earth. The miracles attributed to him, both during his life and after his death, number in the hundreds, but perhaps his greatest miracle was the transformation of a proud, wounded soldier into a mystic whose influence continues to touch lives across centuries and continents. His body, found incorrupt years after his death, became a symbol of the enduring nature of his work and vision. The story of Ignatius of Loyola unfolds as a tale of redemption and discovery. From the depths of adversity, he rose to change the world around him, leaving a remarkable impression on history. But the journey of sanctity does not end here. In the video appearing on your screen, a new story of faith and revolution awaits you. May our faith find us.